David Allison. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies in Architecture and Health at
Yay.
Clemson University. We've been around since 1968. I'll just leave it for the rest of it.
Good afternoon, and I'm Keith Diaz. I'm Dean of the College of Architecture and Planning at the University of Utah.
Well, some of you have heard me a few minutes ago, so I'm Craig Zimring, Professor of Architecture, Director of the Centigrade Design Lab at Georgia Tech.
Good afternoon, I'm Neda Norouzi. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Texas at San Antonio.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Burpee, and I'm a research associate professor at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I co-direct the Integrated Design Lab there. Nice to see you.
So can we unmute Naomi and show her on the screen so that she can introduce herself? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you and to hear you. This is the first. So David, thank you for answering your text in my desperate attempts to get you all to turn to unmute. This is Naomi Sachs. I'm calling in from Washington, DC. I'm an assistant professor at University of Maryland and founding director of the Therapeutic Landscapes Network. Thanks.
Thank you, Naomi. So now we're going to go back to the slides, and we're going to talk a little bit about what these folks are doing. David, you can go.
Great. So let's see, I think we need to advance. I learned that we have to push it this way. Right button. Yeah. Yeah, we're trying. We're working on it. Can you please advance the slides? Okay. Oh, it's taking time.
Okay, it's gonna come up.
Okay. Well, anyway, so like I said, I'm the director of the graduate program in architecture and health at Clemson. We are a small program, but we've been around for a while. And we are, it includes both a Master of Architecture degree as well as an interdisciplinary program in planning, design, the built environment with a health focus. So we are physically integrated with our research enterprise, the Center for Health Facility Design and Testing that my colleague Angelique Joseph runs, and a cohort of Ph.D. students. Herminia was one of them recently. And so they're physically embedded in the studio space with our Master of Architecture degree students. And so they, if we could advance it one more. Yeah, so you got to click it again. Yep. Forward there. Yeah. And so these are some of the questions that I think Herminia was talking about, introducing. So we are physically embedded in a space together. And the idea of that is that we would have our professional degree students, those students that are primarily going into practice, to be physically integrated with our research enterprise and become informed consumers and knowledgeable about research and how it informs design. Simultaneously, we want the design enterprise to inform the research questions and how research is being presented in the world to the design professionals in a way that is both usable and digestible in the design process. Okay, does that make sense? So we start off by setting the stage for our students, and we look at both the historic and contemporary context for healthcare and what influenced that. The social, scientific, political, cultural forces at work in any time. What did we lose along the way? We know that there was great concerns for daylight and connections to nature and natural ventilation at certain points in history and healthcare. And in the mid-20th century, we kind of got away from that with the hospital as a machine, the hospital as a factory, medical care over healthcare. And so we wanted to learn those lessons and maybe revive some of the, at the same time, we want our students to understand what is the context they're operating in today in terms of what do the people they're going to be working with, what informs the decisions that they're going to be making about the built environment, and how will that affect what they do as design professionals. And then what are the needs of specific populations, from the elderly to behavioral health to other special needs populations. So we want them to understand the context for the practice of healthcare architecture. And then we want them to understand how we understand the world around us. We actually start pretty abstract with Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, talking about quality and how we achieve quality and balancing both analytical and intuitive processes in design and research. And then how do we achieve that in the work that we do? And then also through a participatory approach, we work with, we build on the work of Christopher Alexander in translating. I still think of pattern language as an early evidence-based design instrument. And then problem seeking as a methodology for engaging diverse constituencies in how we build the environment. And we do that often through consensus and common ground, but then we take the students and we try in that course to actually do a service learning project where they're actually working with a real client group on a small project locally close to home often, and often then it integrates into a studio project later on in the semester. Then we do get into the design of healthcare facilities, but we try to think big. We try to think about the context for healthcare organizations. We like to think and teach that hospitals are in fact much like urban design problems, medical campuses. They're dynamic, they're ever changing. That we can't think of them as a static building that we're going to design and it's always going to be like that. The lifespan of a hospital is quite long. At the same time, we want to address some core issues that we think are important in healthcare. Operational effectiveness and efficiency safety is obviously an important concern. And how do we, the pressure that healthcare organizations are constantly under to do more, better, faster with fewer human and material resources. But also we want to balance that with optimizing health and health outcomes in communities. And we try to introduce how that can occur in the design of buildings and facilities and campuses. We think that healthcare organizations and healthcare campuses should be models for healthy community planning and design. And then how can we optimize the experience for patients, families, and staff in an incredibly stressful set of circumstances that people find themselves in healthcare facilities. And then finally, that we know that whatever we design today is going to be obsolete tomorrow. That healthcare is influenced by incredibly rapid and accelerating forces of change, from politics to reimbursement to pandemics to all the other things, science and technology and clinical practices. So we try to introduce that in a course that then parallels with one of our studios, where the students then actually take this knowledge and actually work on the master planning and urban design of a medical campus, as well as the design of a hospital project. We do this through a series of processes, and we work from different scales. So we have 3 studios that lead up to either a comprehensive project or a thesis option for our students. One of the studios, as I mentioned, is about large scale, hospital scale buildings and campuses. One of the studios is focused on smaller scale projects. It might be a single room, like we did recently with our Ripcord OR project that we've gotten a lot of made a lot of presentations on, but it may also be just a small scale facility. And then we have a selected topics in architecture and health studio that goes further afield. It might deal with special populations. It might deal with TBI or acute rehab. It might deal with aging in place. It might deal with issues of sustainability or healthy community planning and design. So we try to branch out from the traditional focus on healthcare facilities. But what is consistent across all these studios is this notion of doing design research that involves literature research, literature mapping, as well as detailed case study analysis. We developed a systematic approach towards case study analysis so that we try to get our students to look very deeply and not just look at the pretty pictures, but understand how they function and operate. And that served as a model for the AIA's case study library that's now widely available if you haven't been there. And then we also then look at design guidelines as translational tools in how you take research knowledge and translate it into effective design decision-making, and that's understandable by a diverse range of audiences so that you can come to some common ground. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? Why is it important based on the literature and the evidence? And then how do you achieve it, and when and where it might apply? And so we try to do that systematically in all of our studio and design courses. And so we try to get through an iterative process with the students. They're not just doing this once, they're doing it in an iterative cycle multiple times. And that's our overall program. Thank you. I think.
Can advance to the next slide. Again, I'm Keith Diaz. I'm Dean of the College of Architecture and Planning at the University of Utah. And I think we have about 24 people that are streaming in. So welcome to you as well. I just want to highlight a couple things. And okay, it looks like the slide's sliding off a little bit there, but that's okay. In terms of 3 moments, this will be different than what David just talked about, which is this really robust specialization in architecture and health that Clemson has, and it's an incredible model. Our conversation will be more about kind of moments along the curriculum that have emerged and kind of set the dialogue for thinking about the intersection between our design disciplines and health. And what I will spend the most amount of time on is actually our design foundations class. So when I came as dean in 2014 to the University of Utah, at the time we were only admitting into our architecture, planning, and design programs after sophomore year, so before they started as juniors. And we saw an opportunity to craft freshman experience for students and do admissions there. And so it created an opening there about what is it that we want to share as the foundation? What is that cultivation that we want to have go on there? And what emerged were really this landscape that's presented in this diagram. The shorthand we have is, we call it the ethic of care. That regardless of the design discipline that you're in, you ought to be operating within an ethic of care. And we established 4 R's as they came to be known that we talk about. And so that's responsibility, resilience, respect, and response. And the way that they get mapped out there is in a couple ways. First, we thought what we're trying to do is set up not really specific knowledge bases, but more orientations and attitudes of what would be that fertile, cultivated ground, regardless of where these students eventually went. And so what you can see there is on the vertical axis is more the orientations, apathetic orientation, a systemic orientation. And on the horizontal, attitudes that we think, regardless of discipline, you need to have. And that's from humility to also a sense that these issues have great urgency to them. And how do you navigate that? And so what you then see in kind of the rounded rectangles there are the 3 core classes that navigate that. That the students take during their freshman experience. And so design context is really about the design thinking process and how it applies regardless of scale. Design ecologies is really focused on that building, that systemic thinking in regard to that. And then the design workshop is how do you respond in a craftsman's like way to the issue at hand. What was interesting is that these 4 R's, this was something I shared in ACSA a few years ago. They line up really well with Joan Taranto's ethic of care. So this is someone that's based in you can call it feminist theory, gender theory. Her work happens to be in nursing. And it just seems to align very well with that and captures this notion that we're all caring professions. What we think is important about this is that it also provides wonderful opportunities for people not necessarily initially interested in our fields to engage in our fields. They all earn general education credit. They're open across the university. And it really allows us to bring people in and say, look, this is what our professions are about. Yes, we do. We end up doing wonderful drawings and having wonderful projects, but we're really trying to create a much better living environment. And so that's the design foundations part. What's emerged over time is within our urban ecology program, we have well, let me step back. We've done a cluster hire that we've been the core college participant in. And so we share a number of appointments, and we have someone here that's actually in that cluster hire. In any case, one is shared between social work and our planning department and focuses on this urban ecology area. And the way we position the notion of health is actually as a dimension of justice, a critical dimension of justice. So that's why I really responded to Robin Gunther this morning, linking together this notion of justice and health. This is exactly what this class is about. And again, what we've done is it's approved for diversity. We have a diversity requirement in our general education, and it's approved for that as well. So again, we're opening it up, the conversation, to where it could go. And if you could go to the next slide. And then this will be really the newest, because this was something that the School of Architecture chair threw at me just a couple of weeks ago. It's fast forwarding a discussion here. We have a kind of a surprise retirement that hit us. And so it's like, well, what are we going to do in terms of some of these? We have these integrated experience that we have in our graduate curriculum. Probably the best known one is Design Build Utah at Bluff. And we used to have one in urban design. And so the idea is, well, what do we want to do in terms of some kind of immersive experience? And what I have diagrammed there, and then you see Generation Lab down there on the bottom on the left, is actually an experiment we ran at the University of Kansas in 2011. And what that was the idea of, we deliver so much substantive content in the studio setting. What if somehow we packaged that, delivered it to those students that are in studio, but also opened that up? That if you're interested in the idea of this intersection of architecture, aging, and mental health, this could be a class that you could take. And so that's what the diagram's trying to get at. And we have some unique opportunities at the University of Utah right now, including we have something emerging that's called the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, which is a tremendous opportunity for transdisciplinary work. And we hope to be actively involved. What I show on the right is where that cluster hire I was talking about is really focused on this idea of resilient places for an aging society, or perhaps in the terms here of age-friendly communities. And this is a wonderful diagram that they've been working on over the course of the last year. And really the idea was that we could begin to get some educational ideas out of that session. And so that's why I have the QR code there. We'd love to have you participate in a virtual seminar in September to talk about where ideas like this class and other aspects may go. And that's what we're doing at the University of Utah.
So this is really, I think, an interesting fit, and our perspective, or at least what I'm going to talk about today, is a little different. So our interest has been, how do we take advantage of the resources of a very ambitious Research One university to create programs around health? And in particular, we had the opportunity to start a PhD program in, I think, 1986. And you saw this morning that some of the faculty here are a result of that program. But what we're really interested in is how can we align graduate study, and particularly doctoral study, with research and also with undergraduate and graduate education. So what we have been able to do with Jennifer and Herminia and others is really to create the Cemtegrate Design Lab. So it's an active research lab that is closely tied with the courses that we provide, and that our projects become fodder for and clients for the classes. So, for example, Herminia and I, the last couple of years, have taught the courses in evidence-based design and healthcare design of the future. This is all very incestuous because we are working with the University of Utah and my colleagues here in the Huntsman Mental Health Institute looking at design for mental health, a translational research building and a receiving center for people facing mental health crises, but they become the topic of the research for the class. So we invite people from Utah via Zoom to come in and be clients for the class. And we then go through a series every year of standard steps, but with different areas of focus. So for example, the standard steps are how you do a lit review, how you do evaluation, how you formulate a proposal, how you do design guidelines. So there are standard steps, but also what we take advantage of is that there is great hunger at Georgia Tech, interest, I should say, at Georgia Tech in health and healthcare. And so, and for the human experience. So when I met Clayton sitting in the back of the room there a couple of years ago, I talked to him and his advisor, Lauren, and I asked, what do you do? And he said, he's interested in the relationship of people in the built environment. And of course, he's in interactive computing. So there is the opportunity to deal with, at the college level, industrial design and building construction, at the broader Georgia Tech level to deal with computing and systems engineering and others. And this class is typically 3/4 engineers and 1/4 from our college. And that is formed with teams that are by definition multidisciplinary. They have to be. We help them form that. So part of the discussion is how you talk across disciplines and how you build, how you rotate the room and think about common problems. And then the fall course is the basics of evidence-based design. The fall course is the Healthcare Design of the Future, which is a project-based course. The spring class is one in basic skills, evidence-based design. And that what we have found is that this is well enough accepted that it's become a listed minor or a listed option in 4 or 5 different engineering departments at Georgia Tech. So we get, people coming this semester. We had 7 students from biomedical engineering talking about engineering design as part of what they did. So I think there's these classes are 20 or 30 students, and that there's a report at the end of every semester that goes back to the client. And we have the opportunity then to follow up, and they have influence on these projects, on the research projects, and on the build projects if they're associated with these. So it is this notion of how can we as design educators thrive in a ambitious Research One university and take advantage of our resources, and because it is often a challenge because of the studio curriculum and other things. So we're trying to find ways to thrive in that setting. Much more to be said. We're happy to share the syllabi for these classes if you would like. We are constantly improving it, and with Herminia's help, they're now, sort of shovel ready, and we're happy to share with you if you would find it useful. But it is a slightly different perspective. Thank you.
Right, a lot of great conversations. I work at a university that doesn't have a healthcare design program. And in fact, I'm the only professor who teaches healthcare design. So I have to kind of make up for that. And what I do to kind of have my students not miss out on not having a healthcare design program is I bring in real world projects into school. One of those examples is this designing San Antonio State Hospital, which was is a mental care facility owned by the state of Texas. So I got a grant to work on the design and pre-planning this hospital, and I brought that project into studio. The students did spend a lot of time doing research, reading already published peer-reviewed articles. And then we went to the hospital, we interviewed the patients, nurses, doctors, and other staff, and then we brought all these newly gained knowledge into studio and started writing the design program. The students worked in teams of 2. They designed the project and they presented multiple times. I think throughout the semester, they presented about 12 times, which is not usual, but they present to the architects team, which was the HKS in Dallas, and Frank Pitts from Architecture Plus. And then they presented to the members of the hospitals, and then they presented to the state. And I thought having a short video for you guys to kind of hearing from students of their experience would be nice. So if you would please play that.
So our experience in the studio was, I guess, a lot of research. I think this is the first class I've ever taken where I had to do such in-depth research on such a controversial topic, meaning that there's not a clear answer on a lot of things.
It was worth it. It was a lot of research, it was a lot of time that we put into it. It's a lot more work than any of the other studios that I've ever personally done.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, just a lot of research. Working with a partner was different for me. Kathy was a great partner. She worked hard during research and just do the whole thing. Easy to work with.
Yeah, this experience was great. I mean, I learned about healthcare architectural plan. But 2, psychiatric healthcare, how to organize the program, how to, what materials you can use. Everything kind of has an effect on these patients, and having to decide everything that goes into this hospital, it's a lot. And it was really breathtaking to kind of, sit back and just think about everything that goes into this project.
The biggest thing that I've probably learned from this semester is kind of learning how to take a specific model of a building type and then learning how I can utilize that in future things. So for example, this project, we had to deal a lot with mental health. So taking the idea of how a place can affect a person's mood, literally to the point where it can cause people severe depression, but then thinking about how I can apply those facets of architecture into my next project.
Usually our projects are that of not reality. So through this project, we actually got to face reality of something we might overcome in the real world.
How were your classmates?
Great. Love my classmates. It was a good semester. I mean, through the project, we all worked together. We helped each other out if we had issues. We came to each other, so that was a real benefit. This was the first time in studio that we've actually had a project where we interact with the client architects, landscape architects, and so on.
And I'm quickly going to talk about this other project that was that came kind of based on my own experience as a student. I remember that I would take environmental system classes. We heard Robin this morning talking about the importance of sustainability, right? That's not new to any of us. But in my education, that was very separated from my studio. So I decided to develop this course to invite students to take a seminar course at the same time as a studio. And I was teaching the studio, and I invited my colleague, Dr. Martinez Molina, whose specialty is designing positive energy homes. So we worked together. We invited students that take the classes at the same time in the same semester. And the idea was everything that you learn in the seminar course, you incorporate in the studio. And then we needed a project. So for the project, we looked at what San Antonio needs, and nearly 90% of San Antonians, I'm sure, similar to every other state, they want to live in their own home and age in place. So we brought that in with the sustainability idea, and then we decided the project would be a universally designed sustainable home that would allow for aging in place, but also something that's affordable and replicable, so then it can be used by others. We ran the studio as an architecture firm. So students came together and kind of talked about what their strengths are, and they created teams like they might be working with in an architectural firm for. So a group was focused on researching local plants and how that would be incorporated. And then another group was talking to the university president's office of finding where we can build this project. So some of the images here is what you see. I might be out of time. So there's a link there that if you guys like to learn more about it. Before this project kind of was on the edge of getting built, and then COVID happened, so everything was on hold. We have some sponsors, and we worked with architectural firms and engineering firms in San Antonio that were all very involved in the studio and creating, again, that kind of working in an architectural firm environment and communicating with people of in different fields was the benefit for our students. Thank you.
It's really inspiring to hear all the work that's happening at these different universities. And I know I'm learning a lot as a panelist. So I'm going to talk about some work that I've been doing. And as Neda mentioned, at her school, at University of Washington also, we do not have an explicit health design program. Some of you may know my research has been in high performance healthcare. So that's my research expertise, and that's my primary role at the university as research faculty. And thinking about the spectrum of scales from atmospheric health through decarbonization of our healthcare facilities to human health and the impact of the built environment. And I have a strong connection between the healthcare work that I'm doing and prioritizing health in all design, and bringing that forward through my research and to my students that I'm teaching. And so I thought I'd give just a little snapshot of a seminar that I teach, and it's called Topics in High Performance Buildings. And I'm lucky enough that I can make the seminar whatever I want it to be. And so we explore high performance design through the more quantitative metrics using the Living Building Challenge as a framework. And that's the lecture content of the course. And I bring in, I'm one of the experts, but I bring in other expert speakers on different topics. And weaving through the course as a research assignment that the students are working on simultaneously is a project that they have to do research about empirical evidence that supports why we implement high performance design. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Let's go to the next slide. And one of the basis for that research project is a bigger project that I'm working on with a group of firm partners who are representatives of firms that are located in Seattle. Some of them are national, international firms. And I'm going to be talking more about this project tomorrow at 9:45. So come to that if you'd like. But the importance of this is it's an existing research project the students are contributing to. And the genesis of this project was through these firms. And they really, really wanted access to empirical evidence that supported the value of high performance design, translated and ready to use. And so we created that project, and it resides on a website. It's a tool that can be used. And let's go to the next slide. And it looks at not the how-to about high performance design, but why do, and providing literature evidence of why, for example, providing daylight is important for human health. This is research that exists, but we're putting it in a form that architects can quickly access. And the students get to choose one of these topics and spend a quarter researching it and understanding what the literature says about why we might implement these different design elements and what the value cases are for these design elements. And through a series of essentially literature review and presentations, they learn about the topic. They do sometimes a literature review for the first time, which is, in my opinion, very important for them to learn some of these research methods and understand what it's like to read research papers and understand them and synthesize them. And then let's go to the next slide. And they work with the firm partners and as mentors in that process. And so they meet with one-on-one with a firm partner twice during the course of the quarter. And then those firm partners come to their presentations at the end of the quarter. And that process is a really important one, both for the explicit goals of them learning about the students, learning about the topics, but there are a lot of implicit goals in that part, in that pairing and mentorship as well, where the firm partners learn a lot about the empirical evidence that supports why we do some of these high performance design features, that how they support human health. And there is a connection for those students to the firms later in their career as they graduate. And the students, as I mentioned, they present, these are just snapshots of the presentation. They produce a one-page research synopsis. So they have to summarize what they've learned in a short piece. They have to share what the most important papers they were that they read. So if their firm partner wants to understand what's the one paper I should read, they can produce that for those firm partners. They produce a literature review in Excel that then I can use later. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And they do a graphic representation. So these are design students and they are visual at their core. And so they make a representation of the research and how they synthesized it and understood it, which is a pretty interesting process. And I love to see that graphical representation, the results of that. And so then what I do at the end of the quarter is I compile all of their presentations into a book, loosely a book, compiled, they do them in the same format. It's a book that all the students get at the end, but also those firm practitioners get because they were involved in the process. And then we can use that as a research group, research entity, as a jump start to our work to keeping this tool that we've created, this Rosetta Stone tool, alive, and understanding what might not be in it that should be based on the students' yearly research. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So now we are going to, I'm going to fast forward the slides, but we are going to listen to our virtual panelist. Can we unmute Naomi?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Sorry that I couldn't be there in person. And I just have 2 slides, and so I'll try to keep it brief. Like Neda and Heather, the University of Maryland, I'm in the Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture, and we do not have a specific healthcare design program, but I believe that when they hired me 3 years ago, the department was interested in health care and health design, really sort of more broadly. And my specialty is landscapes for health, more specifically healing gardens and other access to nature and healthcare, but other types of landscapes for health as well. And so a lot of the faculty in the landscape architecture program, they do touch on health or focus on health in one way or another. Sometimes it's more ecological health. Dr. Kwan, Byung-Suk Kwan, she has an environmental justice course, as well as a human or people in the environment. And many of you, if you're at EDRA, you probably know Denny Ruggieri. So he is our newest faculty member, and he's going to be bringing a lot also about environmental justice and people in the environment. So I do not have, at least yet, a class on specifically on health. But I try to infuse that into all of the classes that I teach. The 3 classes that I teach are a first year Master of Landscape Architecture Studio. So this is the first semester of the first of 3 years for Master of Landscape Architecture students who, you know, don't even know how to use a scale ruler yet. It's all very, very new. And then I teach the second semester sophomore design studio. So it's only their second semester of design. And I teach the research methods class, which is basically thesis prep for MLA students. And so no matter for the design studios, no matter what our project is, if it's a real project, I try to infuse health. And many of you probably do this with sustainability, for example, as well. You don't teach a sustainability studio, but that's interwoven into everything that you do. So a couple examples. Oh, and I try to highlight 1 or 2 facets of health per project. So one was on the lower right here, you see Kendra Hyson. She's with the Urban Studio, which is a DC nonprofit design studio. And we had the students, this was when we were all on Zoom 2 years ago. So they designed a local garden that was a very steep site, and they had to deal with stormwater management, but it was also in a food desert and a predominantly Black neighborhood, very poor neighborhood. And so the students really talked about environmental justice, social justice, as well as health and stormwater management. And then another project that we did, this was also really during the pandemic, we did a project in Memphis, Tennessee with the nonprofit Nature Sacred, and the students got to visit without visiting Memphis and do this design for a garden for the Hospitality Hub, which is a homeless shelter, and it was the women's garden. So the students got to learn about designing a garden for women who are homeless, who often also have issues with domestic violence, other trauma related issues, substance abuse. And so they learned about small scale garden design and trauma informed design. And another more close to home campus design was a vertical studio with Dr. Kwan and another professor, where the students redesigned a parking lot on campus to be a nature RX or park prescription, nature prescription health park. And they had to look again at stormwater management and other aspects of sustainability design, and also human health. The students also incorporate research into all of their projects. So I teach them about research informed, if not fully evidence-based design. Again, these are young students or new students. And so we talk about, you know, doing research and how that informs the design that they come up with. One of the things about being in a program that doesn't have a specific healthcare design aspect is the need for collaboration. And so I bring in a lot of guests from planning and architecture, public health at University of Maryland and also outside of University of Maryland. Next slide, please. And then this is something new and fun that I've just started this year. Was able with the department equipment grant to get some what I call design empathy equipment. And some of you, if you took Mardell Shepley's classes at Texas A&M, you've worked with her riding in wheelchairs and trying to get from here to there. My first experience was at a healing garden design program where I had to be in a wheelchair and then walk with a IV pole. And I found out just how, how bad the wheels are on an IV pole and how susceptible they are to any tiny little crack in the pavement. So we now have 2 walkers, or 3 walkers, 2 wheelchairs, 2 IV poles, and these GERT suits, which simulate old age. And the students, I take them to this equipment to every project site where the students test out what it's like to be in a wheelchair on grass or on a gravel pathway. And we also do an exercise where the students have to go from our building to the student union, which is a very steep uphill, and there are a lot of stairs, and it's a real challenge. So I'm now trying to figure out a research project basically with this question, can you teach empathy? It's much easier to teach empathy when you have an embodied tool like these tools, but how can you teach empathy about things like racism and sexism, where you can't just don a uniform? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and have been very inspired by what other people have said. And again, I wish I were there in person. Thanks.
Thank you, Naomi. Well, I don't know about you, but I learned a lot, and I think listening to these educators speak, and I do see some kind of commonalities, right? I think that there is a need for understanding health and design in various scales, right? We're talking about urban scale, we're talking about building scale or interior scale. And I do see that there's a need for all. But I also see a lot of creativity, right? In the sense that sometimes we don't have an environment that is already preset to talk about health or to focus on that, but we can make it happen, right? Like, I think there's so many aspects, and it's not hard to make a pitch for teaching about health, right? I think everybody knows that how important it is, but it is about really trying to, even though you have a class that is not focused on that, there's always a way to integrate that. Now, and I'm sure this is amazing, but I'm sure we all have challenges doing what we do. So that is the discussion. I'm gonna open up the discussion part of our panel. And I want to talk a little bit about what are the challenges, right, that you are facing in the classroom to integrate these health-related goals in design education. And although I think we heard here many great ways to bridge theory and practice, right? Like, I think another common theme was working with clients with real world problems. And that goes really, it's really aligned with pedagogical, theories and philosophies that we do need to motivate students to really think through things that are really happening in the world. And I think, Neda's video showed us how that resonates with students, right? Like, okay, yeah, that makes me think. It makes you reflect and put yourself in their shoes. And also, Naomi's technology, right, to create that empathy. But I face a lot of challenges, bridging theory to practice. It's not easy. So in Georgia Tech, in our class, I think it's pretty challenging to help students understand how research and how to apply that research. So, and again, the scale becomes an issue because it's hard, as designers, we need to respond to so many things in the built environment and design, but how do we focus on, because we know that research is pretty, focused, and how do we teach students on how to consume that? So, I'm just putting out there some things that are really hard, like creating empathy. What are the challenges within that? The level of specificity of some environments, and how do we in a semester are able to cover everything? So multidisciplinary collaboration, working with real clients, is that something that we're facing challenges with? Or virtual teaching, I think we all face that recently, how hard it is to teach design virtually, but I think we are still here standing. So I think we probably learned some lessons. So of course we will, and that goes to successes. What are the successes? What are the things that we tried out and really worked out? So again, I'm gonna open to our panel to discuss, but I do encourage you, if you have specific questions, just raise your hand. I'm going to try and bring the microphone to you and also online. So Naomi, if you can help us maybe bring up some interesting things happening on the chat.
So can you hear me okay? Great. So a few challenges challenges. One is that our multidisciplinary situation that opportunities that we've created also creates lots of problems because there's not a lot of shared background between biomedical engineers and architects. So there's great possibilities for collaboration, but lots of opportunities for misunderstanding. I think in addition to that, we have chosen to look at specific projects and specific project types. They vary from year to year. It could be an ICU or mental health, but the learning curve is very steep to understand what the question that I start the class with is, what does a nurse do and what does a doctor do and so on. The modal answer is a nurse does what a doctor says. So that's the way our students start the class. These are healthy young people who don't have much experience with healthcare. So learning about all of this, I sometimes wish, the grass is always greener, but I look at the wonderful Clemson program where they have the opportunity to work with students over years to develop this depth of knowledge, I think is really impressive. Last quick challenge is that I've been following with interest and alarm this term DYOR. Is that familiar to you? So when there's a question about vaccines, the answer is DYOR, do your own research. And so that has become in common currency, and that in a less loaded way is often what we do in the studio or in a design project. We tell students to go off and do research, but what they are subject to then is all of the problems of doing your own research, of confirmation bias, of not being able to assess sources, of not being able to effectively read a research article, not being able to assemble it. And all of my degrees are in psychology, so by the time I finished my undergraduate degree, I had read 1,000 research articles. I don't know, a lot. That's not true typically with design students. So the question is, how do we bring everybody up to a reasonable level of competence in DYOR?
Yeah. Is it on?
I think it is. I think I got it.
Is it on? Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I think how you develop a common language, first of all, a common set of values, a common set of experiences. Collaborative projects are inherently, more complex, more messy, more time consuming, and design problems in studios tend to move at a pretty rapid pace. The academic calendar, we're slave to that. And even in a multi-year program, we still have to honor courses and the 15-week schedule of a semester and things like that. So how do we balance depth and breadth, right? And distance is always a challenge, I think, in those things. And that's kind of why we go back to PERSIG and Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, of how we achieve quality with, we all know it when we see it, but we all have trouble defining it in similar ways, right? And we all have different values that we bring to it. So how do you do that with a diverse group, right? And so that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just here to pile on and agree. And I believe deeply that decisions should be made in evidence and data. And how do we present and provide that evidence and data to students, but also get them to be their own critical thinker about data and evidence. So they're basing their decisions over their life career in things that we know to be true and will create a better built environment. And I think, time, we've had a lot of time ourselves to steep in this information. It changes, it grows, evolves. But the snapshot, I showed this one little blip of a class that students get to dip their toe in, right? And that's just the start. So they understand there's this body of evidence behind why we're saying these things. They can do it themselves a little bit. but it's a challenge, I think. It's, yeah.
So I just want to make sure that Naomi is unmuted in case she wants to chime in. But what I want to say is that, sorry, I just want to chime in and say that what I've learned is that it is okay to win the battle and not the war, in the sense that we're not going to expect that design students are going to be read an article at the same level as a researcher or understand research at the same level, but again, how to consume research. So I think a couple of things that we are doing and a couple of things that we need to do. So one thing is train them to understand what we're doing. It's more about awareness. So I think in our class, Craig, I think it was really helpful to help them build an evidence table, for instance. I thought that was really, it helped them, okay, how do I break down this information, right? How do I read it? And I understand from, okay, these are kind of, elements that they're looking for, but then this is the application, and this is how I can find this application out there in the industry. It doesn't have to be research-based, but these are, because we're all doing good work, right? But it's about recognizing the good work that relates back to the evidence. And another thing I think is a community start using the tools. So Heather talked about tools that are being developed to help students translate the evidence. So I think we just need to start, advertising these tools and building more tools, because I think that is another one of our roles as researchers to translate it and give it to them. But these classes these exercises that we're doing is, I think they're critical in let them know how this is done. They're not going to do it, but I mean, they understand the process and they understand the level of rigor and where this information is coming from. So I thought those are really positive things, but understanding that we need to do the work of translating, because otherwise it's going to be hard for them to use that in practice.
I do have you can go ahead.
No, go ahead, Naomi.
Well, I wanted to share Sandy Bernal, who's another guest on Zoom, what she said. She says, I commonly ask students to use their own reality and realities they have access to imagine real design solutions. We all are a kind of case study. We are patients, we are users, and we are susceptible to know cases that need attention in the built environment. So thank you, Sandy, for that. And then I'll also throw in my own challenges, which I think, again, since it's not a health design program, the students aren't always open to learning, especially the undergrads, the sophomores. Why do we need to do research? What does this have to do with design? So it takes a little bit of convincing, and I'm starting to learn how to do that, but I would be open to other people's ideas as well. And one more thing is just, it's so exciting to at least be here virtually with you, but we're all so strapped for time. But gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could have some sort of consortium where we all meet and share these ideas more than once a year, but no one has time. So what do we do about that?
The only thing I'll add is I think it's important to recognize kind of what's the context or the milieu in which these programs exist. And I think some of the challenges that can exist is when it's something that kind of stands off to its own, right? And in other words, it's got to do all the heavy lift. First time introducing students to research, first time introducing students to community engaged practice, and so forth. That's a heavy lift. But if there's a context in which one begins to say, look, there are components of this that whether they're focused on health or not, they ought to be learning as architects, designers, or planners that can be embedded earlier on, which is really kind of the whole idea that we had with the design foundations. If we can begin to set the context of why that these things are important, then when all of a sudden, whatever, upper division undergrad, you begin to address the issue of research as being important, then they can say, oh, well, that's why, because we learned about that as being important earlier on. It's not so much as they're learning skills and then all of a sudden it's like, this is a new skill that is being presented, and why do I need to know that all of a sudden? So it can shift the context. So I think the context in which we operate is something to be aware of.
Thank you all for making me very happy because I always struggle with this, right? I started teaching in 2017, so it's still pretty new. And I always think, okay, in time, I will learn how to deal with this, how to put everything in one semester and not kill the students. So it's good to know that's the challenge that everybody else has. And I think to Naomi, I think it's, for me, what has worked is a lot of love, right? Just kind of say, I promise it will be worth it. Just go. And once you,
love is good.
Yeah, you know, and it works. And I wanted to just kind of connect that to success stories. And for all of us, I think I have one of my students here who, until last year, didn't know a whole lot about healthcare design. He took one of my studios, and then we went to HCD conference. He graduated this semester and was hired to work on the healthcare design team in an architectural firm. So I think that makes it all worth it, all the trouble. So.
Hello, just a follow-up comment, which is that as I listen to this conversation, what I realize is that the good news is that our field has matured. You know, I have the chair, the dean next to me here on the platform. Saif, you were an associate dean and so on. So we now have our members who are chairs and deans and other positions where I really think that that your comment, Keith, of a second ago, that we need to think not just about the one or two classes, even the one program within a school, but really these as core skills that we build throughout the curriculum. And we have enough senior representation now and enthusiasm. I think we can begin to do that. I guess my question, and I don't have an answer, is how do we continue to work together? How do we take on Naomi's challenge of staying in touch? And, you know, my personal situation is that we're interviewing a new chair for architecture, and how do we get him or her engaged in this discussion early from our side, but from peers like you, to build this so that it's just assumed that throughout the program we have the ability to read a research article, to think about health, to engage clients, all of these things that we take for granted in this room and in this meeting, but isn't typical. So how do we keep this moving is my question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't have an answer of how we keep it moving. And you and I are on the back ends of our careers. So it's up to the next generation to be on carrying that forward. I mean, I think that this discipline, the disciplines that we're all involved in have done an excellent job with the pioneering work of Craig and Roger and others on building the knowledge base. Okay. And now I think what we need to work on is how we translate that knowledge into design action, okay, into usable design decision making, not just by designers, but in collaborative teams, right? And so that's the challenge, right? Because and this is not just for our students, but for practitioners, right? We all see how the knowledge base is sometimes abused or misinterpreted or misunderstood or misapplied, and students are, of course, novices at this whole process. So how do we build those translational tools of how do we use research knowledge effectively in making decisions quickly in a design context that is inherently complex, messy, multivariable, and not focused like research is, right? And so that's where I think the next stage of our discipline needs to go.
Definitely. I just want to build on that because yesterday I heard something so interesting. It was about design, research and practice. And it's like, yeah, when they look at the limitation section in a research presentation, designers just like, okay, but it's, you know, there's so many limitations. And I think it's hard for researchers to say yes or no, right? Like this is the way to go or this is not. But I think in school, I think we're allowed to do that because it is about reflecting on problems, and it's about showing that there's not only one answer, but it's how you think about the problem and how you solve problems. So that's something that I think is the goal, you know, in our classes, in our electives, is about, and that's why we go in a small object at the end of the day. We cannot go big because, and the projects end up being like a lighting system or something more focused, but they get to apply what they learn, but it is focused, right? The research is very focused, but it's about understanding the problem. So I think we have a lot to learn from other disciplines, right? Like from medicine, from psychology. They've been doing this, you know, they've been reading more and more, and of course we're very different. We, you know, we're designing, we're mechanical beings too, but I think there's a learning curve in us in school trying to say, no, we need to read this stuff. It is not okay to say that, you know, design students and master students don't read. No, it's just about learning, you know, what is relevant. I think we're in a young field still, right? Like we know that health and design is still young, but we have robust, you know, we have a great literature review that is very comprehensive and needs to be updated, by the way. But it is, we have some sources, and I think it's about, and again, I'm talking about a variety of things that you guys mentioned, but also the continuity, right? Like we cannot, so I think that's a big challenge at Georgia Tech too, because we want to reach out to the studio, but we're not there. So we need the studio-based courses to also refer back and forth to us and us to them. And I think that's still a challenge in university sometimes. And you're really privileged to have that all together. But I think most of us have that disconnection sometimes. And I agree with you, like it is important that you're thinking of things and then you're learning in other classes, but you're applying. So, you know, sometimes I see sometimes this happening, like studios that are aligned with seminar, but it's pretty hard. We've been through that. It's really challenging. So I think these are, and I think now we're all kind of mixed up because we're talking about future state as well. So we're already at the second part of the discussion, but it's all a common thing now.
I think this is a challenge I'll put to the research community too. Okay, so an example. So we had a student doing views to nature, well, a study in the ICU, right? A PhD student doing it and looking at the literature. And, you know, of course, we all views to nature, daylight, all that. That's great, right? So looking through all the journal articles on that subject matter, right? How many of them actually showed the layout of the rooms that were studied, showed the position of the bed, showed the orientation of the bed to the window, showed the size of the window, showed the whether the window had operable controls on it and whether they're opened or closed. So, you know, the challenge to the research community is to package the research in a way that design individuals actually need to use that research, right? Because otherwise they are going to make those generalizations that may or may not be a correct interpretation of the research that was done. So.
Oh, we have a question. Oh, let me.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for a great panel. I really want to add to what you mentioned right now, because I think what is really key here is how can we make a fundamental impact on architectural education? Because my concern is that there are many of us working on great, amazing projects like the ones that Naomi mentioned. But once we leave that program, I mean, they may not be necessarily continued by other faculty who may not be interested in this topic. That's why I think in both architectural and planning, I mean, in both architectural and landscape education, it's really important to make a fundamental impact by changing NAP criteria, because NAP started working on sustainability more than 20 years ago. And now for the first time, actually, their criteria is requiring some evidence about how, for example, the position of, I don't know, how the layout of the building is affecting the way that we are using energy, right? Or electricity. And so how can we do that? I mean, by making, changes in NAP, because I think that's the key thing. If NAP starts kind of asking for specific kind of evidence about how your design is addressing issues that have to do with health and equity, then our job is going to be much easier, and it's not going to rely on us as individual educators. It's mandatory. Everyone must do it, and the schools may lose their accreditation, if they don't show evidence. Thank you.
Was that Arsalan? Who was that?
Yeah, Mohammad Garipur.
Oh, Mohammed. Oh,
hello. Is this on? Yeah, I'll talk about accreditation. I mean, I think there's, in my mind at least, there's two sides to it right now. So I would say in the past, where and this is specific to architectural accreditation, they had a whole bunch of student performance criteria that you needed to meet and so forth, and that has been peeled back in the most recent accreditation standards. But I also have a philosophical position on that, which is to say, in my mind, accreditation is a low bar. If we can't hit that, something's wrong with our program. We're just focused on the wrong things. So to me, that's a low bar. What's more interesting is what the new accreditation allows or is focused on, which is really about the identity of the program. How did it distinguish itself? What does it do that's special about it? And if you can begin to articulate what that is, and in my mind, a possibility would be to think about health broadly, right? That maybe eventually you get to a healthcare specialty or something like that, but health is going to permeate the curriculum. And this is how we do that. I think, to me, that's a fertile ground to take a look at, because there are so many dimensions that can begin to tie to that. If you have faculty that are interested in justice dimensions, I don't think they have to scratch very deep before they're going to hit issues of health and so forth. So I think it is actually a fertile common ground that could exist in accredited programs.
Hello, this is, hello Naomi online too. This is David Hayes from the University of Illinois. So hello, nice to see you on the screen there and hear you. So thinking about the conversation in the plenary session this morning, one of the presenters talked about how many people have health problems in part because of pollution, the building industries, the way we tear things down and all. And relating that to this session, I'm really struck by, with all of these moving parts, like it's incredible to imagine teaching sophomores how to research, how to learn about this specific content, but also over and over in the United States, at least in architecture programs, it's how to make something from nothing, right? So that we're always making things and tearing them down and making things and tearing them down. And so I'm curious to know if either to simplify the process or more true to this kind of larger paradigm of health, how many of you are using or are tempted to use existing sites rather than having the students say, do this research and then invent something from scratch, but thinking about you have a client, they have a hospital, they want something adapted. I'm really interested in that aspect. I always say to students, when they're struggling to write a paper, I say, write the paper, then edit the paper, because editing is easier than writing, right? So write a bad paper and then edit it to make it a good paper.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to remind that is the last question because we need to wrap up.
Hi, I'll be quick. One is, I think all of our projects in the class that we talked about are, some of them are existing hospitals or settings that people are adapting, but they're all heavily contextualized. So in the sense that we're understanding the perspective of the operations, of the patients, of others. So we're not forcing students to invent something from the ground up simply out of their imagination, but working within a context. So that, I think, covers part of your suggestion, which I totally agree with.
So I mean, I think that the kind of nature, and I think one of the reasons we tend to avoid going into existing structures, at least in our program, is there's a certain kind of learning that happens in practice when you've got a specific project and a specific site and a specific client and things like that. And that's an incredibly valuable learning experience. I think one of the things that we try to do is talk about the broad principles, the big ideas, the processes that will apply time and time again. And so we do tend to avoid sometimes those very particularized, specific contextual things. Not that we don't work in existing facilities, but I think there's a different kind of learning. We're actually trying to take young people and prepare them to be lifelong learners and to understand the process of that, as opposed to solving only very specific problems and that may have unique approaches, unique contexts, unique things. So I think there is a balance in how we approach that, and because we want them to understand the value of the environment, the value of health, the value of those things, and then learn about processes that can do that, that can be applied time and time again into a very diverse range of processes over their life, and to become lifelong learners. That's what we're trying to do.
Great, well said. Great, Edwin. Yeah, I think I want to thank you all, thank the panel, and thank you all for interacting with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. And I don't know who filled out that, but I am so thankful. Was it you, Naomi?
It was. I wasn't even sure whether you could see it.
That was the intention, but I didn't have control of the computer. So that was actually what I wanted with this. So thank you, but make sure to take a screenshot or make sure that we save it.
Oh yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you all.